Welcome to Mental and Emotional Health 5, Living Memories. In this video, after a brief recap of Chapter 1, we're going to look at what happens when pain from the past revisits us in the present in the form of a living memory. Hi, just a quick reminder that if you want to get straight into the practical tools needed to change, you can jump ahead to Chapter 4, which starts at video 12. But if you can, keep watching chapters 1 to 3 first, because this will give you a huge advantage when putting these tools into practice. Let's begin with a brief recap of what we've learned so far in Chapter 1. We've learned that we have 3 main emotional needs: a need for connection, validation, and protection. We've learned that emotional pain is like an inbuilt alarm system which alerts us whenever these needs aren't met. And sometimes the pain alarm goes off in the present to alert us to an unmet need from the past. Now today, building on the last video, we're going to look more closely at what happens in the brain and our experience when our present day pain alarm alerts us to an unmet need from the past. Now, fair warning, this video is a bit more sciencey. This is because science helps us to make sense of our experience more deeply. And the more we understand our experience, the better we'll be able to put into practice the process of change. But that said, you don't have to understand the science to progress through this series and to create change. So if you're having trouble taking in this video, feel free to skip over to the next one anytime. I recently put on some Nivea sunscreen, and instantly the smell transported me back to the 80s, when the sand was hot and the waves were enormous. A time when tie-dye clothes were cool and trampolining was an extreme sport. For a brief moment, I'd been sucked into a time vortex. I'd had what I call a living memory. That was really fun, but I've had living memories which were really not fun. One in particular, which I'll explain in a later video, used to hit me out of the blue with distressing thoughts and feelings and beliefs. Each time I experienced it, it was like I was reliving the past in the present in vivid detail. So what are these living memories and what causes them? Well, here are 5 points about living memories. Living memories, commonly known as traumatic memories, are memories which appear to be alive with distressing thoughts, feelings, images, beliefs, and/or body sensations. They are the result of a malfunction in a part of the brain called the hippocampus. See, normally, as a memory is transferred from short-term working memory into long-term memory, the hippocampus gives the memory a timestamp. This is how our brain knows that the event is no longer happening, because it's been placed in time. But during a traumatic event, the stress hormones that our body produces to help us fight or flee affect the working of the hippocampus, so that the distressing memory is not given this timestamp. As a result, the memory is not labelled as in the past, and so it feels as though the event is still happening. For example, a person who was assaulted last month won't experience the memory as though it happened last month. Instead, they'll relive the memory as though it's happening now. Number 2, living memories can be triggered by events that are similar to the original event. For example, a partner walking out triggers the same emotions and body sensations as when a parent walked out all those years ago. Or they could be simply triggered by sensory information, like sounds or smells or images. This is why a war veteran might automatically hit the floor at the sound of a helicopter. 3, some living memories are born out of a single traumatic event, like a car accident or a humiliating experience. These memories might present themselves as a flashback, a bundle of images, thoughts, sensations, and emotions that reflect the original experience. The resulting trauma from these single events is known as big T trauma, which people with post-traumatic stress disorder experience. Number 4, little t trauma, on the other hand, comes from a build-up of painful experiences over time. Little t trauma might result from being in a toxic relationship, or staying in a dysfunctional job for too long, or from lifelong prejudices to do with race or class. People who experience little t trauma are sometimes diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Little t trauma is tricky because it can't be pinned to any one event, and so it might present as a painful belief that doesn't make sense, or as emotions with no apparent meaning attached. We might suddenly feel shame even though we haven't done anything wrong, or fear even though we're safe, or we might feel sad for no apparent reason. For example, one day while sitting in his lounge room, Jacob is mystified by a rush of emotion from out of the blue. But what he doesn't realise is that the afternoon light is falling in the corner of the room in the same way that it did every afternoon when Mum would leave him alone for hours at a time. So right there in his favourite chair, Jacob's past is hijacking his present in the form of a living memory. And number 5, some living memories are pretty mild, while others can be really distressing, like portals into a past that we're trying to leave behind. But these portals are also opportunities for profound change through a process called memory reconsolidation. Memory reconsolidation is when a living memory is reactivated, updated with new information, and then filed back into long-term memory without the attached trauma. Over the last decade or so, this process has been demonstrated over and over again, both in the lab and in the therapy room. And this is wonderful news for anybody haunted by living memories. It means that Julian from the last video no longer has to fly off the handle at his wife. Laura can come out of the shadows and enjoy parties. And the living memory that I mentioned earlier no longer troubles me at all. Key points. Living memories, commonly known as traumatic memories, are alive with a mix of distressing thoughts, feelings, images, beliefs, and body sensations from the past. Living memories are the result of an encoding problem that happens when the hippocampus tries to file traumatic experiences into long-term memory. Some living memories are difficult to understand because they take the form of an emotional memory or a body memory which appear to have no meaning. Question: have you ever had an overblown reaction? An emotional reaction which was more intense than the situation warranted? In Chapter 4, I'm going to offer a model which can help us transform our own living memories through this process of memory reconsolidation. But next up is Chapter 2, How Does the Mind Heal? In Chapter 2, we're going to look at the inbuilt processes which make it possible for the mind to heal naturally without intervention, kind of like how the body can heal. So head over to the next video to begin Chapter 2, or for a bit more science on today's topic, hang about here. Want more? Here are 2 more facts about living memories. People respond to traumatic events differently. For example, 2 people are mugged at knife point. One bounces back without any help, while the other stays stuck for months or even years in fear and distress. Why is this? Well, we might assume that the struggling person is more weak or mentally fragile than the other. But this isn't true. How well a person recovers from a traumatic experience depends on how empowered they felt in their moment of trouble. And how empowered they felt is determined by how well resourced they were to deal with the threat. To use an obvious example, a person with good survival skills who is caught in a snowstorm is going to be less traumatized by the event than a person who doesn't have those skills. This is because the person with survival skills was adequately resourced and therefore felt empowered to solve the problem and get to safety. Now, of course, people can be resourced in different ways. Perhaps a person is physically strong. Perhaps they have access to a phone, or maybe they have a knack for problem solving. All of these resources create a sense of empowerment in the midst of the threat, which means that less trauma remains in the mind and body after the event. But there is another resource which is particularly effective at shielding us from trauma, and that is another person. Science shows that during a distressing event, nothing calms our nervous system quite like the presence of another human. For example, millennia ago, a hunter's threat system is on overdrive as he is being tracked by a lion. But suddenly his tribe appear over the hill. Instantly, the hunter's threat system begins to calm as his sense of empowerment goes up. Later that night, as he's feasting on lion flesh, the hunter feels deeply connected with his family as they huddle together by the fire. There is no greater resource in the midst of his distress than the presence of his tribe, and as a result, his memory of this difficult day will not be embedded with trauma. The hunter will remember the event as though it's in the past. Fast forward to today, and there is still no substitute for the support and connection of others. For example, 2 children experience the loss of a parent. Sadly, the remaining parent of the first child is struggling to support him because of their own lack of resource. And so the boy finds himself alone in his loss and sadness. Well into adulthood, he is still haunted by a sense of abandonment and aloneness. But the second child experiences regular, loving connection with her dad in the midst of her distress. The warmth of his compassion flows into her nervous system, and the girl feels supported and empowered in the midst of her loss. As an adult, the girl is well equipped to support others in their times of distress too. So, in a nutshell, in the midst of a traumatic event, the more resourced we are, the more empowered we feel to deal with the threat. And the more empowered we feel, the less we'll be bothered by traumatic thoughts and feelings and beliefs about the event in the future. Normally, an intensely emotional experience is stored in the brain as an episodic memory. Episodic memories can be vivid because they hold detailed information about the original episode. What happened, what was seen and heard, and what was felt. But over time, as these memories move back and forth between short-term working memory and long-term memory, they gradually lose their intensity and clarity. This is because each time a memory is retrieved into short-term memory, it becomes malleable and subject to change. So any errors or changes that are made to the memory while it's in our conscious awareness become embedded into the memory as it's filed away again. In this way, details are gradually lost and confused until the memory loses its emotional impact. This is how an episodic memory gradually changes into what's known as a semantic memory, which is a memory that holds general knowledge about the world. Semantic memories are much more matter of fact. For example, an episodic memory of, oh no, my favourite vase is smashed all over the floor, gradually turns into a semantic memory, which is more like, vases can smash all over the floor. But in cases of post-traumatic stress disorder, this conversion process doesn't happen. Unless they're repaired, living memories from PTSD remain as episodic memories, charged with emotion, sensations, images, distressing thoughts, and narratives. But this is not the end of the story.